In 1993, a 6-year-old boy vanished during his own birthday party. No witnesses, no signs of struggle, just one balloon caught in the backyard fence. Now, 30 years later, his sister finds a locked attic closet, and the truth they were never meant to see. Some houses were built to keep secrets. Before you press play, hit subscribe for more true crime mysteries and untold stories that keep you up at night. The backyard smelled like barbecue smoke and bubble soap. Children ran across the grass, paper hats bouncing, their laughter sharp against the summer air. Yellow streamers fluttered from the porch. A plastic folding table sagged under the weight of a cake, balloons, and half-opened presents. Rachel Minton stood at the edge of it all, one hand on her hip, the other shielding her eyes from the sun. She was 11, almost 12, old enough to roll her eyes at the magician her mom had hired, but not old enough to be excused from attending her little brother's 6th birthday. "Blow out the candles, Tommy," someone shouted. Her brother stood in front of the cake, crown crooked on his head. He smiled, cheeks round and frosting smeared. For a moment, Rachel softened. He was annoying, sure. He followed her everywhere. But he was her brother. And then he was gone. She didn't see it happen. No one did. One minute he was laughing, his arms raised in victory over the cake. The next, someone asked, "Where's Tommy?" A minute after that, people were calling his name. Rachel remembered the way her mother's voice cracked as she screamed it. She remembered the balloon, the red one, caught in the chain-link fence, and the door to the house, open when it shouldn't have been. She remembered the police, the dogs, the backyard floodlights as men with radios searched the woods behind the fence. They never found Tommy. The last image Rachel had was the half-eaten cake left on the picnic table, candles still smoking. The house on Emerson Street had been empty for 6 months. Empty of people anyway, not memories, not echoes, and not, Rachel was sure of it, whatever weight still hung in the air every time she stepped over the threshold. She stood in the foyer now, keys dangling from her fingers. The lock freshly turned. The door groaned as it eased open, as if resisting her return. The same scuffed hardwood, the same crooked baseboard in the hall. And further down, at the end of the corridor where the paint faded, Tommy's old room. Rachel didn't let herself look there yet. It had been 30 years. Her mother was gone now. Stroke, quick and quiet. Her father had passed even earlier, drunk and bitter in a rented trailer after the divorce. And with no other siblings and no family left to claim the house, everything fell to Rachel. Sell it, clean it, move on. That's what the lawyer said. But Rachel knew better. You didn't move on from a place like this. You carried it, room by room, breath by breath. She dropped her duffel on the entryway tile and clicked on the hallway light. It flickered before settling into a dull yellow hum. Dust spiraled in the beam like falling ash. The air smelled stale, mildew, attic rot, and something else. Something sweeter, like old crayons and stale cake. She moved through the living room slowly. Furniture draped in sheets. A framed cross-stitch on the wall still read, "Bless this house," in fading burgundy thread. Her mother's touch. Untouched since the day she'd gone into assisted care. Rachel had avoided coming back. The lawyer handled the probate. The appraiser took photos, and she'd signed papers from her apartment in Chicago. But none of that mattered now. The market had cooled. No offers. And buyers, the agent said gently, had a hard time looking past the unsolved disappearance, as if it were a stain. Rachel made it to the kitchen and poured herself a glass of water from the tap. It tasted metallic. She didn't care. Her phone buzzed. A message from her boyfriend. "You okay? House still haunted?" She didn't answer. Instead, she opened the back door and stepped onto the porch. The yard was overgrown. weeds curling up through the patio bricks. The fence still stood, chain link rusted in places. And there it was, the spot where the red balloon had caught 30 years ago, the string tangled in the fence's jagged wire. Rachel felt her stomach knot. Tommy had vanished from this yard. That fact never changed. Dozens of children had been present. 2 parents, a magician, a neighbor grilling hot dogs, and not one person saw her brother leave. No scream, no struggle, no sign of forced entry, just gone. Rachel took a breath, held it, then went back inside. She climbed the stairs. Her footsteps echoed. No voices, no pictures on the walls anymore. The hallway up here smelled like old wood and something floral, probably the last can of air freshener her mother had kept spraying, trying to mask a house that refused to feel normal. Tommy's door was closed. Rachel didn't touch it yet. Instead, she went to the master bedroom, hers now, technically, and opened the window to let the place breathe. The breeze moved the curtains just enough to make her heart skip. She shook her head. Get it together. The house had 2 floors, a finished basement, a small attic. The attic. That she hadn't checked yet, not since she was a child. Not since her mother had locked the upstairs closet and claimed the door was stuck from swelling. Rachel had accepted it. Children did that, believed the stories they were told when they were afraid to know the truth. But now she was 39, and the door was still there, still locked. Rachel grabbed a flashlight from the hall drawer, then climbed the narrow hallway to the attic staircase. The stairs creaked beneath her weight. At the top, the landing, a small dusty alcove, and the familiar wooden door set into the slanted wall like a secret. She stared at it. The closet her mother never opened. It looked warped, painted over a dozen times. A rusted keyhole glared up at her from the brass knob. Rachel tried the handle. Still locked. She stood there a long time, one hand on the door, the other holding the flashlight. Her heart thudded. It didn't make sense, but the longer she stared, the more she felt it. A subtle pressure behind the door, like something weighted. Not alive, but not inert either. She exhaled and stepped away, back downstairs, back to the present. She spent the rest of the evening boxing up kitchen items, opening windows, folding up old sheets. She found her father's tools in the garage, still arranged neatly, untouched since his last days in the house. The hammer was there. So were flathead screwdrivers, a crowbar, and a set of lockpicks she didn't remember him owning. Rachel took the crowbar. At midnight, she climbed back to the attic. This time, she didn't knock, didn't hesitate. She wedged the flat end beneath the frame, braced her foot against the door, and yanked. The wood groaned. The lock gave a metallic shriek. Paint cracked. Then, pop! The door jerked open 2 inches, something dry and sharp swept across her face. She staggered back, coughing. The air from inside smelled like mothballs and rot, old fabric, and something worse. The unmistakable scent of something that had once been alive and no longer was. Rachel raised her flashlight. The beam swept across a tiny space no bigger than a walk-in closet. Dust floated like smoke. There were shelves, a broken doll, a child's shoe, and on the floor, a stack of Polaroids wrapped in twine. Rachel didn't breathe, didn't blink. Her hand trembled as she reached down and lifted the bundle. The top photo was Tommy, eyes wide, face pale, kneeling in the corner of a room she didn't recognize, his hands clutching a stuffed bear that had been missing since the party. The next photo, Tommy again, older. The third, someone else, a girl, not from their family. Rachel sank to her knees, her whole body cold. This wasn't just a closet. This was a vault, a record, and someone, maybe her parents, maybe someone else, had locked it for a reason. Rachel sat cross-legged in the attic, flashlight trembling in her hand, the stack of Polaroids on the floor beside her. There were maybe 50 of them, some in color, some black and white, some curled at the edges from time and heat, all of them haunting, not by what they showed necessarily, but by what they refused to explain. The first 10 were of Tommy, not at his birthday party, not in his bedroom. These were taken after. Rachel flipped through them slowly, holding her breath with each one. Tommy sitting in a small, windowless room. Tommy sleeping on a cot with no blanket. Tommy standing in front of a wall with faded cartoon wallpaper, his little face frozen between confusion and fear. The same blue shirt from the day he vanished, the same dimples, the same look she hadn't seen in 30 years. Rachel pressed a hand to her chest. Then came the photos that didn't make sense. A girl, maybe 7 or 8. Long hair in messy pigtails, wearing pajamas with ballerinas on them. Then another of her, eyes red from crying. Then a third child, a boy this time, younger than Tommy. Then a fourth. Each photo similar in style. Same room, same lighting, same stiff expression. The kind of photographs not meant for albums. Clinical, archived, controlled. Rachel flipped faster now. Some were labeled on the back, faint handwriting in smudged ink. Subject C, May 1994. D number 2, non-compliant. Group E, initial interview. It felt like she was holding evidence. Not of a disappearance, of a program. She stood suddenly, heart hammering. The attic swayed around her, the smell of mildew and dust threatening to choke her. Who took these? Why were they in her house? And why did no one ever say a word? Rachel carried the stack downstairs, flicking lights on as she moved, desperate to push back the dark. The photos made a soft slap as she laid them out across the dining room table. The wood was warped in places. But she didn't care. She needed to see everything. Tommy's eyes stared back at her from 5 angles. In one, he looked directly into the camera, unsmiling. His mouth was slightly open, like he was about to speak. Rachel's hands trembled as she opened her laptop and Googled missing children. Portland, Oregon, 1993 to 1996. Within minutes, she found one. Darla McCree, age 8, missing since July 1994. Last seen walking home from her aunt's house. Never found. Rachel looked back at the photograph. Pigtails, the ballerina pajamas. It was her, the second girl in the photos. Rachel clicked deeper, more names, more face. The boy with the birthmark on his chin. A girl in a yellow windbreaker. Another child, hair buzzed short, eyes blank. Every one of them matching someone on a missing persons report from Oregon, Washington, or Northern California. It wasn't a coincidence. She gathered the photos back into a stack, this time wrapped in a dish towel, and placed them in her bag. Then she opened the drawer where her mother kept important documents and began searching. Tax records, receipts, utilities, deeds. And there it was, a receipt from 1992, handwritten. Storage fee, 6 months prepaid, Cedar Pines Community Program. She stared at it. There was no such program listed in the current Oregon Business Registry. Another receipt from 1993. Stapled to the back. Conditioning material delivered. Emerson residence. Atton R. Minton. Her mother's name. In print. Rachel sat back, spine stiff against the chair. Her heart wouldn't slow. The room felt colder now. Not in temperature, but in mood. Like the house itself was watching. She picked up her phone and dialed. Not the police. Not yet. She called Marla, her childhood best friend, the only person still in town who might remember that day, the only one who saw the party unfold from beginning to end. The phone rang 3 times. Hello? Marla, it's me, Rachel. A pause. Rachel Minton? Jesus, it's been, Decades. I need to ask you something about Tommy's party. From 1993, Why? I think... Rachel stopped. How did you say it? I found photos of my missing brother. I think my mother was involved in some kind of child conditioning program in our house. Instead, I'm cleaning out the place. There are some things that don't make sense. Marla went quiet. Then, I never forgot that day. Not once. You were there when he disappeared, right? Yeah, I was. But no one ever asked the right questions. Rachel sat forward. What do you mean? I remember you were inside when it happened. Your mom sent you to get paper towels. You were gone like 2 minutes. And then everyone was screaming. That part I remember. But before that, before Tommy disappeared, your dad kept taking kids inside. What? I thought it was weird. He said it was for pictures with a magician, but I never saw any camera. Just kids going in and coming out, crying. Rachel's mouth went dry. How many kids? I don't know, 4 or 5? I think I went in too, but nothing happened to me. You're sure it was my dad? I mean, yeah. Or maybe it was someone else in the house. I just remember the door closing, and the silence. Rachel's fingers gripped the edge of the table. Why didn't you tell anyone? I was 11, Rach. And the cops didn't really ask. Everyone just assumed Tommy wandered off. Rachel nodded, even though Marla couldn't see her. Do you want to come by? She asked. I could use another set of eyes. A pause. Yeah, Marla said. I think I should. They hung up. Rachel looked at the photos again, spread across the table like cards from a rigged deck. Her brother. Other children. Each photo a record of silence. And at the bottom of the pile, a single envelope. She hadn't noticed it earlier. She opened it carefully, expecting more receipts or notes. Inside was a photograph, older than the rest. Black and white. Grainy. It showed a room. Not just any room, the one Tommy had been photographed in. Except this time, it was empty. And in the center of the floor, drawn in chalk, was a symbol. A circle with a triangle inside. And underneath it, someone had written, Project Promise. Room C. Rachel's blood turned to ice. She whispered the words aloud. Project Promise. It didn't sound like a name from her childhood. It sounded like a code, a system, a secret she'd never been meant to know. And now that she did, there was no going back. Marla arrived just before dusk. Rachel saw her silver SUV pull into the gravel driveway, headlights sweeping across the overgrown lawn and rusted mailbox. The car looked new. Her friend looked older. Short hair now, crow's feet at the edges of her eyes. But the way she stepped out, arms crossed, eyes scanning the house, that hadn't changed. They hugged briefly on the porch, not out of affection, but solidarity. They were survivors of the same history, one that had just cracked open. It hasn't changed much, Marla said, stepping inside. No, Rachel replied. That's the problem. Marla glanced around the foyer, her eyes drawn toward the staircase, then toward the dining room. It feels smaller. It always does. Rachel led her into the kitchen, where the photos were laid out on the table, grouped in rows. She said nothing, just watched as Marla leaned in, eyes narrowing. Jesus, Marla muttered. Is that Tommy? Rachel said. And not just him. She walked her friend through what she'd found. The stack in the attic closet, the envelope marked Project Promise, the receipts. Marla's expression darkened as she flipped through the Polaroids. Her fingers hesitated over the ones of Darla McCree. I remember her, she said. She lived near my aunt, went missing the summer after Tommy. You never said anything. No one did. Marla looked up. This town eats its tragedies, files them away and pretends it's polite. Rachel pointed to the symbol in the last photo, the triangle in the circle, under the words, Project Promise. You ever seen that before? Marla nodded slowly. Not here, but once, in the woods. Rachel blinked. What? There was a clearing behind Elkhart Elementary. Kids called it the Promise Circle. We used to dare each other to go out there at night. Marla paused. It was always marked. That same symbol, spray painted on a tree. Sometimes chalk, sometimes carved. We thought it was a prank. It wasn't. No, Marla said, it wasn't. They sat in silence for a minute. The house groaned faintly in the settling dusk. Rachel felt a chill ripple under her skin. There's something else, she said, reaching into the folder where she'd stored her mother's documents. She unfolded the receipt. Storage fee. Cedar Pines Community Program. Marla stared at it. Cedar Pines. That was the old behavioral clinic upstate. Closed after a scandal in the late 90s. They found out the place was running unsanctioned studies on autistic kids. Forced isolation, sensory deprivation, weird reward systems. No charges ever stuck. Rachel felt her throat tighten. My mother had a receipt for them. And that means she was involved. Or Dad. Or both. Rachel stood. There's something I haven't looked at yet. The basement. Marla rose with her. Let's go. The basement hadn't changed either. Same warped wood stairs. Same damp air. A weak bulb dangled from the ceiling, casting a cone of light across a concrete floor stained with time. Rachel led the way. Her foot hit the last step with a hollow thud. The space was cluttered but not chaotic. Boxes of old Christmas decorations, her dad's tool bench, laundry machines long since unplugged. But something about the far wall felt wrong. Too smooth, too clean. It didn't match the aging cinder block around it. Rachel walked to the wall and pressed her palm to the surface. Hear that? She asked. She knocked. Hollow. Marla stepped beside her. That's not original construction. No. Rachel looked around and spotted the crowbar she'd left leaning against the dryer. She grabbed it, wedged it into the seam between the wall and floor, and pried. The drywall cracked with a sound like splitting bone. Dust billowed. Behind it, a door, steel, painted the same beige as the wall but unmistakably different in material. Industrial, windowless. There was no handle, just a recessed keyhole and a small faded sticker. CPC promise, controlled access only. Marla stepped back. Jesus Christ, it's real. It's all real. Rachel whispered. This was under our house. All these years. We need bolt cutters. Number Y still have my dad's keys. They went upstairs, breath quick, not speaking. Rachel rummaged through the junk drawer in the hallway desk. Dozens of keys. One tagged garage, another labeled back gate. One had no label, just a triangle etched into the head. They ran back down. Rachel slid the triangle key into the lock. It turned. Click. The door groaned as it opened. Beyond it was darkness. A smell of damp carpet, old glue, and something chemical hit their noses. Rachel flipped the flashlight on. It wasn't a room. It was a hallway. Narrow, carpeted. Fluorescent light tubes in the ceiling, dead. The beam from the flashlight flicked across numbered doors on either side. 1A, 1B, 1C. Marla covered her mouth. They built rooms down here. Rachel stepped inside. It was silent except for the sound of their breathing. Her light swept past old file cabinets, chairs, what looked like a small fridge. The air got colder the farther in they went. Then she stopped in front of the last door. Room 1F, Princess Room. The door was ajar. Rachel pushed it open with 2 fingers. Inside was a child's room. Dust-covered toys sat on shelves. A faded mural of a cartoon castle adorned one wall. A twin bed with pink sheets. In the far corner, a camera mount. Now empty. The closet door hung half open. Inside were tiny clothes on wire hangers, many still wrapped in plastic. Marla didn't speak. Rachel walked toward the bed and saw something on the pillow. A note. Folded. Yellowed with age. Written in a child's uneven hand. I was good today. Will I get the pony now? Rachel sank to her knees. She could hear her brother's voice in the back of her mind, that little lilt he had when he was nervous. Could picture him being asked to play along. Smile. Sit still. Be good. How didn't I know? She whispered. How did none of us know? Marla put a hand on her shoulder. They didn't want us to. Rachel stood, numb. We need to call someone. Who? Rachel didn't answer, because she didn't know. The photos, the program, the room. They weren't the end. They were the beginning. Rachel didn't sleep that night. She tried, laying on the old couch in the living room, a blanket pulled up to her chin, flashlight beside her like a weapon. But every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind against the window, snapped her eyes open again. Images haunted her. The photographs, the pink sheets, the chalk triangle in the attic photo, and the hallway, that goddamn hallway, underneath her childhood home. She was still awake when the sun cracked through the blinds. By 6:30 a.m., Marla was already back. She'd gone home for a few hours, returned in leggings and a hoodie, hair tied back, coffee in both hands. I couldn't sleep either, she said. Rachel took a cup without a word. Her hands were cold. I brought my old laptop, Marla added. Thought we'd check the discs. Rachel blinked. What discs? Marla pulled a Ziploc bag from her tote. Inside were 6 mini CDs and 3 VHS tapes, items they'd pulled from a locked cabinet in the basement corridor after their first walkthrough of the princess room. They'd stuffed them in haste. Neither had spoken about them yet. Think they're from the same people who made the photos? Rachel nodded. Same labeling system, CPC. Promise A, Subject 4. Conditioning Sequence 1. Marla set up the laptop at the dining room table and slid in the first disc. Rachel hesitated. Part of her didn't want to know, but the other part, the part that had waited 30 years, leaned in. The video flickered to life. No intro, no timestamp, just a static shot of a small windowless room, gray walls, a mirror on one side. A child entered frame. Tommy. Rachel's breath caught. He was 6, same red shirt, same haircut from the birthday party. He sat in a plastic chair, hands in his lap. A male voice came from off camera, flat, measured. Tommy, what do you do when you hear the chime? Tommy didn't answer. Tommy, what do we do when we hear the chime? Tommy blinked, then said quietly, We sit still. Good. Again. We sit still. The screen cut to black. Marla paused the playback. Rachel gripped the table edge. That wasn't Dad's voice, she said. No, Marla replied. Too flat, too practiced. Rachel stood, pacing. Her whole body buzzed with something like rage, something like grief. This was a script. A conditioning routine, Marla said. Classic behavioral testing, command-reward repetition. Why would they do this here? Marla opened the second disc. Another room. Another child. This one was not Tommy. Blonde girl, barefoot, crying silently as she was told to repeat phrases like, I belong to promise. Good children don't disobey. I have no home but here. Rachel turned away. Enough, she whispered. Marla paused again. This is sick. It's worse than sick. It's organized. They sat in silence, both women staring at the paused frame. Rachel finally broke it. I think we need to find out how deep this goes. They spent the next 2 hours dissecting the documents found in the lower basement. Clipped files, photocopied intake forms, delivery manifests for conditioning materials, and a master schedule stamped with the words Cedar Pines, Project Promise, Satellite 3. Supervising Officer R. Minton. Status: active as of April 1993. Rachel stared at the name, her mother. Satellite 3, Marla repeated. That implies there were others. Rachel opened a filing cabinet beside the workbench and found rows of manila folders, some labeled by month, others by subject ID. One folder was labeled simply, Field Notes, May 1993. Inside, pages and pages of handwritten notes. Subject number 12. TM continues to resist verbal commands unless prompted with food or sensory reward. Delayed adaptation but signs of imprinting increasing. Parental influence eliminated. Subject responds to male authority voice. Programming sequence C underway. Rachel dropped the pages, her face pale. That's my brother. Marla picked up another folder, this one with photocopied consent forms. These are fake signatures, she muttered. This isn't even your mom's handwriting on some of these. This was forged. Rachel couldn't sit. She paced, heart racing. So this wasn't just my family. There were more, other people, other houses. Other kids, Marla said. Other rooms. By noon, the house felt unbearable. Rachel needed air. She told Marla she was going for a walk, just around the block, to breathe, to remember what grass underfoot felt like. But she didn't go to the park. She went to the public library. Because the phrase Project Promise hadn't left her mind, she requested archived local newspapers from 1991 to 1996. And there it was, a small article buried on page 6 of the June 1993 issue of the Portland Herald. New Youth Wellness Program opens second campus in Clatsop County. Cedar Pines announces new Promise Track pilot system aimed at improving compliance and emotional regulation in children facing trauma-related symptoms. The program's founder, Richard Minton, says the model is based on structured behavior shaping and environmental control. Richard Minton, her father. Rachel stared at the name. Founder, not just complicit. In charge. She returned to the house by 2 p.m. Marla had cleared the table and was organizing the folders chronologically. I found something, Rachel said. They registered it, in public. As a wellness initiative, Marla looked up. They were testing these methods here, using the house as a live-in environment. Rachel nodded, and hiding behind terms like emotional regulation and child resilience. Marla flipped open a new folder. Subject Archive. Princess Room Sessions. Volumes 7 to 13 inches inside were Polaroids, transcripts, schedules for feeding, bathroom breaks, quiet time. And in the back, a diagram. A map of the entire underground section beneath the house. More than what they'd seen. Jesus, Marla whispered. There's another door. Rachel stared at the drawing. Behind the conditioning corridor, through a secondary wall, a room labeled Holding. No key marked for it, Rachel said. Number, but we know it exists. We have to see it. Marla looked at her, hesitant. Are you sure? I mean, if this is where they kept them, before the training started. Rachel didn't hesitate. I need to know what happened to my brother. They returned to the basement with the map. The door wasn't where they expected it. It was hidden behind a set of utility shelves stacked with old detergent bottles and rusted lanterns. They moved them together, and behind them, just like the diagram showed, a sealed hatch. Metal, bolted, no knob, just a vertical handle and rusted hinges. Rachel grabbed the crowbar again. It took both of them, heaving with their feet braced against the wall, to force it open. The hatch groaned, dust coughing into the air. The flashlight beam barely cut the darkness ahead. The smell hit them first, rot, and something chemical, like old bleach soaked into concrete. Rachel's voice was barely a whisper. God, what is this? A single step led down into a chamber. Concrete walls, no ventilation, a drain in the floor, no lights, just a mattress on the ground, rotted, stained. Marla stepped back. Is this where they kept them before the rooms? Rachel nodded, stomach twisting, and then she saw something else. In the corner, half buried under debris, a stuffed bear. Its right ear was missing. its fur once white, now yellowed and stained. But Rachel knew it. She'd bought it for Tommy on his 5th birthday. She sank to her knees. He'd been here. Before the photos, before the scripts. He'd been kept here. Rachel whispered, "You never left. You were here the whole time." They didn't speak for a long time after they found the bear. Rachel sat against the cold cement wall of the holding chamber, the stuffed animal clenched in her hands like a lifeline. Marla stood at the threshold, flashlight beam quivering as she kept her distance from the rot-darkened mattress and the drain embedded in the floor like a silent witness. Neither of them said what they were both thinking, that this wasn't just a conditioning site. It was a prison. And maybe worse. Eventually, Rachel stood. "Let's get out of here." They closed the hatch gently, placing the shelves back over it in silence. Upstairs, the air felt heavier somehow, cleaner, yes, but weighted. Like the house had exhaled a truth it had buried for decades. Rachel washed her hands 3 times. The stink of mold and rust clung anyway. In the dining room, Marla had started sorting through the last box from the princess room closet. An old wooden chest Rachel had retrieved that morning. They hadn't opened it yet. It had belonged to her father. No lock, just a latch. Rachel sat down, hands still shaking, and undid the clasp. The chest creaked open. Inside, stacked neatly in rows, were dozens of old cassette tapes, the kind you'd buy in the 80s at Radio Shack. Faded labels, handwritten numbers, a few marked with initials, but nestled beneath them, wrapped in plastic and secured with a rubber band, was something unexpected. A child's notebook. Red cover, spiral bound. Torn edges. Rachel's throat tightened as she pulled it out. She recognized it instantly. Tommy's. She had a matching one when they were little. Their mother used to buy them in packs, one for each school year. On the inside cover, in big loopy letters, Tommy Minton, age 6. Marla leaned in. "Is that?" Rachel nodded. She opened to the first page. At first it was innocent. Drawings, scribbled letters, the kind of rambling thoughts a 6-year-old might jot down. "I saw a lizard in the yard. It was fast. Rachel said I can't eat 3 popsicles, but I can." Then, halfway through the notebook, the tone shifted. The lines got smaller, the handwriting shakier, and the drawings darker. Stick figures locked in rooms. Black crayon marks covering entire pages. Eyes. So many eyes. Rachel flipped to a page near the back and read aloud. "They tell me to smile when the red light is on. They say I'm special, but I want to go home." Marla put her hand to her mouth. Another entry. "The room is cold, but I'm not supposed to say that. If I cry, they play the sound. I hate the sound." Rachel stared at the next drawing. An image of a triangle inside a circle, same as the symbol from the photos. But in this one, the triangle had a face, a mouth with teeth. A final entry, scrawled sideways along the margin. "Rachel, if you find this, I'm sorry I was bad. I tried to be good like they said." Rachel closed the notebook slowly. For a moment, everything inside her went silent. Then she stood. Her voice was steady now. "We're going to the police." They arrived at the precinct an hour later, a battered banker's box in Rachel's arms. Inside were the cassette tapes, Tommy's notebook, and 2 folders of labeled materials pulled from the promise room. She had considered bringing the bear, but couldn't. Not yet. At the front desk, she gave her name. When the officer asked why she was there, Rachel simply said, "I found something under my house." A pause. Then she added, "It's about my brother's disappearance. And other children, too." They didn't ask more. 15 minutes later, a detective met her in the waiting area. Late 50s, short-cropped gray hair, shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow. His name tag read, Lieutenant Mark Tolan. Rachel told him everything. The birthday party, the attic closet, the hidden hallway, The notebooks, the photos, the symbols. She didn't dramatize. She didn't speculate. She just described what she found. Marla sat beside her, nodding occasionally, filling in the gaps. Tolan listened, taking notes, his face unreadable. When Rachel placed the notebook in front of him, he didn't touch it at first, just stared at it like it might catch fire. Finally, he said, "Wait here." He left with the evidence. It was nearly 30 minutes before he returned. This time, 2 other detectives accompanied him, one female, one younger. They looked like they'd been briefed quickly. "We're opening an investigation," Tolan said, effective immediately. Rachel swallowed. "You believe me?" He nodded slowly. "Let me be clear, Ms. Minton. What you've brought in, it's not just a break in your brother's case. It's evidence of a potentially coordinated criminal operation, one that may still have active members." Marla shifted, like a ring. "We don't use that word lightly, but yes." He paused. "We'll be executing a warrant on the property tonight. Full forensic team. We'll also be coordinating with state and federal agencies based on what we find." Rachel felt her stomach knot. "There's something else," she said, "that I didn't bring in." Tolan looked at her, waiting. "A room. We found it behind a hatch in the lower basement. No ventilation, just a mattress and my brother's stuffed bear, from the day he vanished." Tolan nodded. "We'll look." Rachel hesitated. "I need to know. What happens if we find out he died down there?" Tolan exhaled slowly. "Then we find out who made it happen, and we make sure it never happens again." They returned to the house that night with a full team. Crime scene tape went up before the first evidence bags were filled. Rachel watched from the porch, arms crossed, her whole body buzzing with adrenaline and exhaustion. Tolan moved methodically through the house with 2 agents from the FBI's Child Exploitation Task Force. One of them, a woman in her early 40s, took Rachel aside. "My name is Agent Lowry. I'm going to be handling the digital media review. We've seen groups like this before. They often rebrand, relocate, split into smaller cells." "You think it's still happening?" "We'll know more soon, but yes. I'd bet this wasn't isolated." Rachel sat on the porch step, knees tucked under her chin. The floodlights lit up the yard. Neighbors had started to gather across the street, pretending to walk dogs, feigning surprise. She didn't care. Inside, officers opened the hatch. She watched as they descended into the holding chamber, saw the expressions on their faces when they came back up. One of them had tears in his eyes. At 3 a.m., Rachel was given permission to re-enter the house briefly. One of the officers returned Tommy's notebook to her, inside an evidence bag. "Keep it for now," he said. "We'll need a copy, but this belongs to you." Rachel took it gently. She went to the kitchen, sat at the table, and opened to the final page, the one where Tommy apologized for not being good. She traced her finger along the line, and for the first time in 3 decades, she whispered his name out loud. "Tommy, it wasn't your fault." The search of Rachel's childhood home lasted 2 full days. Forensic teams worked in rotating shifts, scraping wall samples, cataloging contents, photographing every inch of the underground corridor. Agent Lowry and her techs combed through the VHS tapes, the CDs, and the hundreds of labeled files stored in the princess room's hidden cabinets. On the 3rd day, Lieutenant Tolan called Rachel into the precinct. She expected questions. What she got instead was a map. Laid across the table in the detective's office was a large, hand-marked grid of Portland and its surrounding counties, overlaid with red stickers. Some locations were crossed out. Others were circled. A legend in the bottom right corner read, "Project Promise, Satellite Sites. Revenso." April 1994. Rachel stared, her skin prickling. "This was in a drawer beneath the Promise Room bed," Tolan said, "along with blueprints, initials, and task rosters." "How many sites?" 7 confirmed. 4 in Oregon, 3 in Washington. Your house was Satellite 3. Rachel felt lightheaded. 3 of these locations were already demolished, he continued. 1 was a daycare. 1 was listed as an animal boarding facility. 1 appears to be an abandoned home off Highway 26. And the rest? Toland's jaw tightened. 1 is still active. Rachel's eyes widened. What do you mean, active? A property registered to a shell company tied to Cedar Pines. All utilities paid. No registered residents, no activity reported. But the records show monthly supply deliveries. Cash transactions, no surveillance. We're preparing a raid. When? Tonight. The building was a modest, single-story ranch on the edge of Beaverton. Pale blue siding, a cracked driveway, a chain-link fence wrapped around the backyard like a memory of protection, not the real thing. Rachel wasn't allowed on site, but she waited in an unmarked FBI vehicle with Agent Lowry half a block away. Lowry sat beside her, laptop open, comms in her ear. It was dusk. The raid team moved fast. 4 SUVs rolled in, quiet, coordinated. Within seconds, agents breached the front and rear doors. Rachel held her breath. Through the binoculars, she saw the flash of tactical lights, the dull thud of boots across hardwood. For 5 minutes, there was only silence. Then Lowry's radio crackled. We've got them. Multiple miners inside. Alive. Rachel gripped the seat. She didn't cry. She couldn't. The tears had dried days ago, but something inside her cracked open, a space that had been sealed shut since the day of the birthday party. Lowry closed her laptop and turned to her. You just exposed a trafficking network, Rachel. Possibly interstate. Possibly larger. Rachel stared out the windshield at the house, now glowing with police lights. She thought of Tommy, what he'd gone through, what he'd stopped. By morning, it was all over the news. Cult-like child conditioning ring exposed in Portland. Project Promise linked to missing children cases from the 1990s. FBI uncovers basements built for behavioral testing. Several survivors found. Rachel refused interviews. She didn't want her name on camera. Not yet. She stayed in the house for another week, helping investigators catalog, watching her past be peeled open room by room. The walls were full of lies, but also now, truth. And on the 8th day, someone knocked on the front door. Rachel answered to find a man in his 40s, thin, with pale skin and a nervous energy behind his eyes. He looked familiar in that way strangers sometimes do. I'm sorry to bother you, he said. My name's David Karns. I think I might have known your brother. Rachel's breath caught. David explained that he'd been placed in Cedar Pines in 1992, aged 7. He didn't remember his birth name, but he remembered Tommy, a boy with big eyes, a boy who sang to him when the lights went out. He said his sister was named Rachel, David said. Said you used to race to the bus stop together. That's how I knew it was him. Rachel covered her mouth. David reached into his pocket and handed her something. A photograph. Tommy, smiling, missing front tooth, sitting beside David on a concrete floor, their arms linked like brothers. Rachel took it carefully. I don't know what happened to him, David said. They moved him one day. We never saw him again. Do you remember where? David shook his head. Just that it was underground and cold. She thanked him, invited him inside. But he declined. I'm in a program now, he said. Staying sober, part of the Promise Survivors Network. We meet twice a week. Rachel's eyebrows raised. There's a network? There is now. He smiled, almost shyly. Because of you. That night, Rachel sat at the dining room table, Tommy's notebook in her lap. She turned to the back cover, where he'd written in crooked letters, If I'm lost, find Rachel. And after 30 years, she finally had. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Rachel found it in the mailbox, wedged between a property tax notice and an envelope from the state attorney's office. No return address, no postage, just her name handwritten in slanted cursive. Rachel Minton. She carried it inside, torn between suspicion and dread. Inside was a single page. Typed, clean margins, no date, no signature. I was a nurse at Cedar Pines in 1992. My job was to observe and redirect children who failed early compliance. I wasn't allowed to speak to them unless spoken to first. I wasn't allowed to touch them unless it was for containment. Your brother was one of the early pilot cases. He was bright, emotional. He asked for you every night. He didn't forget you. There are others. Still alive, still hiding, still scared. You opened a door most of us had locked for decades. If you want to talk, come to room 206, Willow Pines Assisted Living. Ask for Eloise, but come alone. Rachel read it 3 times. Then she folded it, placed it back in the envelope, and stared out the window for a long while. The next morning, she drove to Willow Pines. It was a quiet facility off the 205, tucked between a Walgreens and a retirement golf course. The lobby was clean, modestly decorated. Walls painted a soft beige that tried and failed to feel like warmth. At the front desk, Rachel asked for Eloise. The receptionist glanced up. 206. That's Ms. Corwin. Rachel's heart beat faster. The name didn't ring a bell. But the moment she stepped into room 206, she understood. The woman inside looked familiar. Not from memory, but from tone. Eloise Corwin was in her 70s, with white hair in a loose braid, and hands that trembled slightly as she poured tea from a chipped ceramic pot. "You came," she said without looking up. Rachel stepped inside. "I wasn't sure I would." "You should have," Eloise said, motioning toward the chair across from her. "You were always supposed to." Rachel sat. Eloise studied her for a long moment. Then, "You look just like your mother." Rachel's jaw clenched. "I'm nothing like her." "Maybe not. But you still carry what she started." Rachel leaned in. "Then tell me. Tell me everything." Eloise nodded, slow and deliberate. And she did. She'd been 28 when she was recruited by Cedar Pines, fresh out of nursing school, naive, idealistic. They told her the children came from violent homes, that they were emotionally disturbed, that the state had failed them, and this program, Project Promise, was their second chance. The first child she worked with was 4. He didn't speak, not because he couldn't, but because every time he tried, the staff hit a button that emitted a high-pitched chime. Conditioning, punishment by association. The point wasn't healing. It was obedience. They called it neutralization. Rachel's throat tightened. "And my brother." "He didn't last long," Eloise said. "Too resistant, too attached to you. He kept repeating your name like it was a code word, like saying it would bring you." Rachel bit her lip to keep from crying. "They moved him," Eloise continued, "out of Cedar Pines, into the field program. That's what they called the homes, satellite sites. Children that couldn't adapt to institutional environments were placed in private facilities with compliant parents. Some were biological, some weren't." Rachel's voice cracked. "So my parents, they volunteered." Eloise hesitated. "They weren't just volunteers. Your mother, she helped design the early curriculum. She believed in it. Your father built the interiors. The conditioning rooms. The princess room wasn't just for Tommy. It was a prototype." Rachel felt the floor shift beneath her. "Why?" "Control," Eloise said. "They believed that if they could create perfectly obedient children, they could eliminate violence, poverty, crime. They used trauma as a blueprint." Rachel stood, pacing now, unable to sit with the rage. "Where are the others now, the ones still hiding?" Eloise looked up at her. "You found one already, David. There are more." Eloise reached into a drawer and pulled out a manila envelope. Inside were 5 photographs, teenagers, adults, smiling awkwardly, all former children of Project Promise. There's a safe house in Washington, Eloise said. And some of them live there now, off-grid. Healing, if that's what you can call it. Rachel looked at the photos. One face stood out. A girl with dark curly hair. Eyes too old for her age. Who's this? Her name's June. She was in the room next to Tommy's for 6 months. She remembers him. Rachel stared at the image. The idea of someone who knew her brother, who could tell her what happened during those dark years, it was overwhelming. Can I meet her? She's been waiting to meet you, Eloise said. 2 days later, Rachel drove up into the hills outside Olympia, Washington. The safe house was unmarked, an old bed and breakfast turned group recovery home. No signs, no fences, just a gravel road and a blue-painted porch. She knocked. The door opened slowly, and there she was, June. Older now, mid-30s maybe, but unmistakably the same girl from the photograph. She didn't speak at first, just stared at Rachel with an unreadable expression. Then she said, "You're Rachel." "Yes." June stepped aside. "Come in." They sat on the porch. The air smelled like pine and rain. "I remember him," June said after a long silence. "Tommy, he was brave." Rachel swallowed. "What do you mean?" June stared at the trees. "He used to sneak food to the younger kids, tell jokes in the hallway. The supervisors hated that. They said he was contaminating the program." Rachel's hands curled into fists. "One day," June continued, "they told him he was going home, that his time was up. He looked so relieved." "But he didn't come home," Rachel said. "No." June looked at her. "He never made it out of the house. I heard screaming that night, then nothing. We never saw him again." Rachel's throat closed. "They told us he'd failed. That's what they always said. Failed kids disappeared." "Do you think he's dead?" June hesitated. "I think he was sacrificed." Rachel's breath caught. "What?" June clarified. "I mean sacrificed to the system, taken out of circulation, used for something, maybe video, maybe testing, I don't know. But he mattered to them. He had spirit. That made him dangerous." Rachel didn't respond. Couldn't. She just stared out into the trees. When she returned to Portland that night, she stopped at a gas station off 84 and stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror. Everything had changed. Her family was a lie. Her house had been a prison. Her brother had been used. And still, something about it all didn't fit. Something wasn't done. Because if Tommy had been taken, if his image had been used in videos, why wasn't he found in the house? Why wasn't there a file, a body, a final date? Why had someone gone to such lengths to erase his final day? Rachel stared at herself in the mirror, then reached into her coat pocket and unfolded Tommy's last notebook page. "If I'm lost, find Rachel," she whispered aloud. "I'm not done. Not yet." The tape surfaced during evidence logging. Rachel got the call from Lieutenant Tolan while she was organizing her mother's documents for court. "We missed it the first time," he said. "One of the agents was re-inventorying the princess room footage and found a cassette mislabeled in a manila envelope inside the back of a false drawer." Rachel's heart skipped. "What's on it?" "We're not sure, but it's marked. Tommy. Final session." She drove to the precinct in 30 minutes flat. In the video review room, the lights were low. A small CRT monitor sat on a steel cart, the tape already loaded. Agent Lowry stood beside it, arms crossed, her face unreadable. Lieutenant Tolan sat on the edge of the table, a legal pad balanced on his knee. Rachel took the lone chair in front of the screen. "Whenever you're ready," Lowry said. Rachel nodded. The tape began. The image flickered into focus. Low resolution, grainy. The familiar promise room walls, pale pink. Cartoon stickers along the trim. That cold, false cheerfulness Rachel had come to associate with programming. Tommy sat in the center of the frame. He looked older, maybe 8. Older than any photo Rachel had seen of him. His face was thinner. The dimples had faded. But the eyes, The eyes were still her brother's. He wore a white t-shirt, pajama pants, no shoes. He sat cross-legged on the floor, hands in his lap, motionless. From off-camera, a voice spoke. "Tell me what we say when we hear the signal, Tommy." A pause. Then Tommy's voice, soft but steady. "I am good. I do not run. I belong to the house." Rachel's stomach turned. The voice continued. "Do you remember your sister?" Tommy looked up suddenly. "Yes." "What's her name?" "Rachel." The name was spoken with such clarity, such immediate emotion, that Rachel felt tears sting her eyes. "And what happens if Rachel comes?" Tommy's expression shifted. The confidence faltered. "They said she's not real anymore." Rachel clenched her fists. "Do you still believe in her?" A pause. Tommy looked directly into the camera. "Yes." The screen flickered. Static, then returned. Now Tommy was standing, alone, facing the far wall. A door opened off frame. A shadow moved. The voice spoke again, fainter now, distorted. "It's time, Subject 12. The final lesson." Tommy didn't flinch, didn't speak. "The world is over. The house is safe. You will forget everything else." Tommy turned, and then his eyes lifted to the camera. "She'll find me," he said. The voice didn't respond. The tape cut to black. When the screen went dark, Rachel sat frozen. The room felt too small, her chest too tight. Tolan spoke first. "That footage is recent." Rachel blinked. "What?" "Within the last 5 years, we did a forensic analysis on the magnetic signature. The tape may have been recorded using older equipment, but the actual content, especially the latter half, was added well after 1993. Rachel's blood went cold. "You're saying—" "I'm saying your brother was still alive 5 years ago, maybe less." Lowry stepped forward. "We cross-referenced the furniture, the lighting, the fixture styles. That promise room isn't the one under your house. It's a duplicate." "A replica," Tolan said. "Which means there's another facility." Rachel felt dizzy. "Where?" Lowry shook her head. "We don't know, but the voice? We're enhancing the audio now, and we're trying to match it to other tapes from the Cedar Pines archives." Rachel stood, too fast. Her hands trembled. "I want a copy of that tape." "You'll get it," Tolan said. "But there's more." He handed her a printed still from the footage, a close-up of Tommy's face. Behind him, faint but unmistakable, was a window. And outside that window, partially obscured by grime, was a metal structure. Lowry pointed. "That's a radio tower, rural design, probably mid-state." "We've started checking FCC registrations," Tolan added. "If we can trace the tower, we might find the building." Rachel's voice came out low, tight. "You think he's still alive?" Lowry didn't answer directly. "We think someone is still maintaining these environments. That someone went through the trouble to recreate the princess room suggests continued usage." Rachel felt sick. "So he's still out there," she whispered. "He was taken again." That night, she didn't go home. She drove. No destination, no plan, just highways. Long stretches of concrete lit by nothing but high beams and memory. Tommy had looked into that camera. He had known she would come. She stopped at a rest area north of Salem and sat in her car, gripping the steering wheel with both hands. A replica room. A hidden site. A brother who might still be alive, or had been, until recently. Rachel replayed his last words over and over. "She'll find me." The next morning her phone rang. It was Lowry. "We matched the voice." Rachel sat up in bed. "Who is it?" "Dr. Frederick Albby." Rachel blinked. "Who?" "He was a behavioral specialist at Cedar Pines. Designed their compliance scripts. Worked with your mother." "Where is he now?" "Last known address was a rural property outside Gold Hill. Registered to a non-profit called the Harmony Well Project." On paper, it's a wellness retreat for emotionally challenged youth, but it's never listed any licensed counselors. Rachel's heart thudded. Do you have a warrant? We're working on it. But it'll take time. The land is privately zoned, and they've got lawyers. Rachel felt the rage rising. Then I'm going. Lowry paused. Rachel, I'm not going to touch anything. I just want to see it. That's all. More silence. Then, reluctantly, don't go alone. By noon, she was in the car with Marla, driving south. They followed the address Lowry had provided, just in case. Gold Hill was remote, quiet, forested. The last 3 miles were gravel. The retreat was marked by a wooden sign shaped like a tree. The Harmony Well Project. Emotional reset and resilience. The driveway curved into a clearing, and there it was. A small, single-story building with pale siding, its windows shuttered. A side wing stretched into the trees. Faint antenna lines ran up a metal pole, a radio tower, just like in the video. Rachel parked half a mile away and approached on foot with Marla through the brush. At the edge of the woods, she stopped, because now she could see it clearly. The room from the tape, built into the rear of the structure. Same pink siding, same cartoon decals, a false window painted to look like it looked outdoors. It wasn't nostalgia. It was a set, a stage. Rachel raised her camera and took a photo, then another. Then she stepped forward. Rachel, Marla warned. But it was too late. A motion light clicked on, and from inside the building, a shadow moved. A man, tall, white lab coat. He turned and saw her. For a moment, neither moved. Then he bolted through the side door. Rachel shouted, "That's him!" They gave chase, running through gravel, stumbling over roots. But the man disappeared into the trees, his figure swallowed by branches. Gone. Marla caught up, breathless. What the hell was that? Rachel stared into the woods, chest heaving. That was the voice. That was Albby. When law enforcement raided the property 36 hours later, it was empty. Stripped, no tapes, no files, just remnants. Half-empty food storage, institutional bedding, and in the rear room, a freshly removed camera mount, and a message, written on the wall in black marker. Some doors should stay closed. The message on the wall haunted Rachel. Some doors should stay closed, written in thick black marker, centered, deliberate, left like a signature. The house had been stripped, yes, but that phrase said everything. They'd been watching, preparing, waiting for someone to come. The door Rachel had opened at her family's house had rippled outward, reaching the very people who had spent decades hiding in plain sight. And now they were on the move, whoever they were. Back at the precinct, Lieutenant Tolan slid a thin, sealed envelope across the desk. We found this taped beneath the faux carpet in the Harmony Well retreat, hidden inside the princess room replica. Rachel stared at it. No name, no label. She opened the flap. Inside were 2 sheets of paper, typed, spaced, clinical, a list of names. Each line bore an initial, a last name, and an ID code. Some had annotations, others were underlined. Rachel scanned the list. R. Minton, SAT-03 Lead, Maternal Coordinator F. Albby, Compliance Programming, Supervisor CPCC, Wilhelm, Child Transfer Logistics, L. Karns, Parental Recruitment, SAT-04D, Halbrook, Content Distribution/Media Handling, J. Reese, Enforcement Protocol/Internal Security, Tenko, Recorder/Room Monitoring. Rachel's breath caught at the final name, K. Tenko. She remembered that surname. Matthew Tenko, the man who had attacked her in Charles's office, her father's friend. The man obsessed with the tapes. Her hands trembled. These are, she whispered. These are the people who ran it. Tolan nodded. And this list? This isn't old. The file was created recently. We're estimating no more than 2 years ago, based on the printer ribbon degradation and adhesive compounds. So they're still alive. Lowry, who stood nearby, added quietly, "Most of them, yes. Some may have changed names, locations, but it's a start." Rachel looked at the annotations. One in particular stood out. R. Minton, terminated 2009. Internal dispute/protocol violation. Her mother. Rachel stared at the line. She was removed. "Looks that way," Tolan said. "And your father?" He flipped to the second page. Near the top, R. Minton Sr., deceased. Asset architect/original site engineer Rachel sat back in her chair. Her whole family, every adult she'd trusted, had been complicit in something monstrous. Lowry handed her another file. "These names, we believe they comprise the operational core of Project Promise. Not just the satellite site you grew up in, but the entire system. They're part of what's now being referred to, internally, as a legacy network." Rachel looked up. "Meaning?" "Meaning they went underground, rebranded, scattered, but didn't stop." Rachel flipped through the second list. Names, addresses. One name caught her eye. June Everson, Sat-01 survivor/witness. "Relocated. You found her?" she asked. "We're in contact," Lowry said. "She's safe, providing testimony." Then another line stood out. Isabel Minton, Sat-03 subject number 12. Status, unknown/unconfirmed removal. Rachel felt like the air had been knocked out of her. "Subject 12, she whispered. "Tommy." Tolan leaned in. "We think he may have been extracted before the program collapsed." "Extracted where?" Lowry hesitated. "There's a third location. It was deep in the mountains. A former Christian summer camp, abandoned in 1987, after a string of allegations the state never investigated. In 1992, the property was quietly purchased by a private trust called the Second Path Foundation, another Cedar Pines alias. Surveillance satellite photos showed a compound with 4 cabins, a central mess hall, and a structure partially built into the hillside. FBI files marked the place as inactive, but Rachel didn't believe that anymore. "You think that's where Tommy is?" she asked. "We think," Lowry said carefully, "that's where he might have been taken after the second site." Tolan added, "If he's still alive, that's the most likely location." Rachel's voice trembled. "Then what are we waiting for?" Lowry didn't answer. Because they weren't waiting. The raid began before sunrise. A tactical convoy moved into the Oregon highlands, vehicles disguised as maintenance crews, cell towers blocked, drones overhead. Rachel watched the monitor in the command truck as the FBI's field cameras streamed real-time footage. Cabin 1, empty. Cabin 2, abandoned. Cabin 3, animals had nested inside. Cabin 4, locked from the inside. Lowry gave the order. "Go!" A battering ram, a single crash. The door swung open, and then voices. Rachel's heart surged. "We have survivors, 2 juveniles, male and female, nonverbal, malnourished. 1 additional subject, male, approximately 30s, unresponsive, needs medical evac." Rachel gripped the edge of the monitor. "Male? Do they have a name?" The agent didn't respond. Then, 5 minutes later, an image appeared on the screen. A man being carried on a stretcher. Pale, thin, eyes closed. But Rachel recognized him. Even through 30 years of change, the cheekbones, the scar on the chin, the birthmark just under his jaw. It was Tommy. He was alive. Barely. Unconscious for days. Malnourished. Vocal cords damaged. But he was alive. Rachel sat beside him in the hospital room, watching machines hum and beep, his chest rise and fall. Doctors said he may not remember much. Said his brain had likely compartmentalized trauma as a survival mechanism, but when he finally opened his eyes, he looked at her, really looked, and whispered one word. "Rachel." He said her name like it was the last safe thing in the world. His voice cracked when he said it, strained, hoarse, barely more than breath. But Rachel heard it. She reached forward and took his hand. His fingers were bony, his nails uneven and bitten down, but he squeezed hers. Hard. "Tommy," she whispered, "I found you." Tears welled in his eyes, but he didn't cry. He just looked around the hospital room. Sterile walls, the IV stand, the flickering fluorescent light overhead, and whispered, "Is it real?" "It's real," Rachel said. "You're safe." He closed his eyes again. Not asleep, just overwhelmed. The machines beeped steadily beside him. A nurse came in to check his vitals and left quietly when she saw the siblings' hands still clasped. The next day, a trauma specialist from the FBI's Child Recovery Division sat beside Tommy and gently began the process of reintroduction. No pressure, no open-ended questions, just images, photos, names. Tommy stared at a picture of himself as a boy, the one from his 6th birthday party, and whispered, "That was before." Before. The word hit Rachel like a fist. The psychologist encouraged him. "Before what, Tommy?" But Tommy only shook his head. It would take time. Over the next 3 weeks, Tommy improved. Slowly, haltingly. His speech returned in pieces, fragmented memories, some clear, some clouded by years of psychological conditioning. He remembered the first basement, the princess room. He remembered the bear. He remembered the sound, a high-frequency pitch that would play when he cried or asked too many questions. And he remembered someone who came to visit him at night, a man. "He had gloves," Tommy whispered. "He used to kneel beside the bed, say I was the one they waited for, that I would lead the others." Rachel's blood ran cold. "Do you know his name?" Tommy shook his head. "But he wasn't the worst," he added. Rachel looked at him. "Who was?" Tommy's jaw tensed. "The woman. The one with the key." He called her Mother Clara. He didn't know if it was her real name. But she ran the 3rd facility, the camp in the mountains, the place Rachel had helped raid. Clara wasn't a Cedar Pines nurse or technician. She was something else, a true believer. She wore a pendant with a triangle in a circle symbol. She read stories to the children about the clean ones and the silent path. She made them repeat mantras before meals. Silence is safety. Obedience is light. Love is what they give if you are still. Rachel wrote every phrase down. She gave them to Agent Lowry and the trauma team, who immediately began cross-referencing the language against cult indoctrination texts. One match came back. An obscure psychological obedience manual authored in 1979 under a pseudonym, Dr. F. Albby. The same man who had fled from the Harmony Well compound. Tommy remembered something else. A room beneath the cabin. No windows, no clocks. He called it the box. "They put you in the box if you asked questions, if you talked in your sleep." Rachel felt sick. "Did they put you in the box?" He nodded. 4 times. The last time was the longest. "How long?" He stared at the wall. "Until the girl stopped crying." Rachel swallowed. "Do you remember her name?" Tommy nodded. "June." The FBI moved quickly. June was relocated to a secure trauma facility in Tacoma. When Rachel called her to tell her Tommy had remembered her, she cried for nearly 5 minutes. "I thought he was gone," she said. "He's not," Rachel told her. "He remembers you." They planned a visit, carefully, with therapists on standby. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Tolan and Agent Lowry compiled a working database of Project Promise personnel based on Tommy's recollections, survivor testimony, and materials recovered from all 3 sites. Over 40 names, 12 still unaccounted for, 2 presumed deceased. The rest, under investigation. Warrants were issued, international alerts placed, and behind closed doors, federal prosecutors began drafting charges: child abduction, endangering the welfare of minors, unlawful imprisonment, conspiracy, production of illicit materials, negligent homicide. Because buried in the floorboards of the camp's main building, beneath concrete slabs and behind false insulation, investigators found fragments of children's clothing, tape reels, and human bone. At least 4 sets of remains. Unidentified. The phrase scrawled beneath the concrete in black ink. They spoke when they shouldn't have. Rachel stood at the edge of the recovery ward's garden, watching Tommy lean on a cane as he stepped along the stone path. Every day he looked a little stronger, but the damage was layered, deep. When he reached the bench, she joined him. He didn't look at her at first. Then he said, "Was it really all our parents?" Rachel nodded. "Most of them, or the ones who let it happen." Looked away. He shook his head slowly. "It's like I dreamed it." "You didn't. I still hear the sound sometimes, at night, the high one." Rachel didn't speak. He looked at her. "Why did you come back?" Rachel smiled sadly. "Because you asked me to." Back home, Rachel found herself going through one last box from the house. Not in the attic, not in the promise room. Just a box of old letters her father had kept. In it, buried between financial records and yellowed greeting cards, she found a photo. 3 children. Standing in front of the original Cedar Pines facility. One of them was Tommy. Another, she didn't recognize. But the third. Rachel's hands trembled. It was herself. The photo changed everything. Rachel stared at it for hours that night, sitting alone in her apartment, the lights off, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the room. 3 children, standing on a concrete path in front of a tan building. The windows were barred. A number, faint but visible, was stenciled above the door. CPC-01, Cedar Pines Core Facility. She traced her fingers along the image. Tommy was there. His familiar round face and gap-toothed grin unmistakable. Next to him stood a boy she didn't recognize. Pale, dark-eyed, blank expression. And then, her, younger, maybe 5. Her head tilted, hands clasped behind her back, wearing a pink dress, smiling in a way she couldn't explain. Rachel's stomach twisted. She had no memory of that day. No memory of ever being inside Cedar Pines. No memory of standing on that path. But there she was, in the heart of it. The next morning, she brought the photo to Agent Lowry. "I think I was in the program," she said. "Not just as a sibling." As a subject, Lowry didn't blink. She had suspected it for weeks. "We ran your name through the intake logs. There's a file. Redacted." Rachel nodded slowly. "I want to see it." Lowry led her into a back office, printed the file, set it gently on the table between them. Rachel flipped through the first few pages. R. Minton, subject file, 03-089 DOB, October 4th, 1981. Intake age, 5 years, 3 months. Enrollment, observer conditioning, early social calibration. Track facility, CPC-01, Sat 03. Guardian enrollment, voluntary transfer, biological, designation, cognitive mirror. She read the words 3 times before looking up. "What's a cognitive mirror?" Lowry spoke carefully. "It was an experimental category. They believed that some children could act as behavioral regulators for others in the program, that by witnessing obedience and love, they'd inspire those still resisting. You were paired with your brother as a test subject. He was the primary resistor. You were the mirror." Rachel's mouth went dry. "They used me to control him?" "Yes, and it didn't work. He resisted, clung to you. Their documentation says your bond was unusually strong, too strong for the curriculum. That's when they moved you out. You were returned home. He wasn't." Rachel felt cold all over. "They erased it from my memory." Lowry nodded. "The program used a combination of emotional suppression, controlled sleep cycles, and narcotic fogging. It's possible you were sedated for large portions. It's also possible your own mind buried it." Rachel stared at the file. Buried. Just like the room. Just like the truth. Back at the hospital, she sat with Tommy in silence. He hadn't seen the photo yet. She wasn't sure she was ready to show it. But when she did, his eyes went wide. "You remember this?" she asked. Tommy nodded. "That day, they told me if I obeyed, I'd get to play with you again. That we could go outside, together. It was the last time they let us be in the same room." Rachel swallowed hard. "Do you remember the third boy?" Tommy's face changed. "That's Noah." "Who was he?" "A ghost." Rachel blinked. "What do you mean?" Tommy looked away. He didn't speak, didn't eat, just watched. "I think he'd been there longer than anyone. Maybe since the beginning." 2 days later, forensic analysts confirmed it. The third child in the photo, Noah Velen, had been reported missing from a foster home in 1986. The case was never investigated. Cedar Pines had absorbed him under a fake name. By 1994, his record stopped entirely. He'd vanished again, this time from within. But then came the break. On a surveillance review of the Harmony Well property, the replica site Rachel had visited weeks before, an analyst noticed something. A figure, moving behind the trees, captured on drone footage less than 36 hours before the raid. He was thin, shaven head, wore a white tunic, moved with slow, deliberate steps. The image enhanced to reveal his face. It matched Noah. He was alive, still connected, still part of it. Rachel knew what that meant. There was still a fourth room, a final site. The others had been decoys, branches of a dying tree. But this was the root, and someone had kept it alive. That night, Tommy told her something else, a memory, a final phrase he remembered being whispered into his ear before they took him from the promise room for the last time. "When the mirror breaks, the house burns." He never understood it, but Rachel did. She had been the mirror, the one they'd counted on to contain him, balance him, keep him docile. And when she failed, when she remembered, the whole system began to fall apart. The FBI tapped every source they had. Within 5 days, they tracked down a string of financial payments linked to a compound outside Brookings, Oregon, an off-grid structure purchased by a private religious foundation in 2010, surrounded by woods, unlisted by the county, guarded by silence. Rachel stood at the edge of the field as the agents prepared for breach. Helicopters circled above. Infrared scans showed 6 heat signatures inside. Lowry adjusted her earpiece. "We're ready." Rachel nodded. "Go." At 3:42 a.m., the team moved. Inside, they found a mirror room, an exact replica of the original promise room, but with one key difference. The walls were lined with photographs, hundreds of them, children, Rachel, Tommy, Noah, June, and dozens more, each labeled, indexed, numbered. This wasn't just a room. It was a library, a record of every child the system had ever touched. In the final room at the back of the compound, they found a man, seated at a desk, thin, pale, quiet. He didn't run, didn't speak, just turned toward the agents and smiled faintly. It was Noah, alive, still silent, still watching. The man who had once been Noah Velen hadn't spoken a word in over 10 years. When the agents brought him in, he offered no resistance, no ID, no plea, just a small, almost childlike smile, like he'd been waiting for it to end. It took Rachel a week to work up the nerve to see him. He was held in a psychiatric unit under federal custody, his room white and windowless, padded not for safety, but for silence. When she entered, he looked at her like he already knew her. She didn't speak at first, just sat. Then, "You remember me." Noah blinked once, slowly. Rachel placed the photograph, the one from Cedar Pines, on the table between them. "You were there the day they separated us." Still, he said nothing, but his eyes dropped to the photo. And finally, softly, he whispered, "You're the reason the door opened." Outside the room, Agent Lowry waited. Rachel joined her in the hallway, shaken. "He spoke," she said. Lowry's eyes widened. "What did he say?" Rachel looked through the glass. "He said, 'I'm the reason the door opened.'" It took another month for the full case to come together. Dozens of former Project Promise survivors came forward after seeing the FBI release. Several had their own photos. Others had fragments, drawings, audio, personal notes with coded scripts. Some remembered nothing but sounds or smells. Others, everything. The breadth of it was staggering. The system had run from 1982 to 2009 under a series of front names and private foundations. It had been funded, in part, by state psychological research grants, hidden in sub-budgets marked for behavioral recalibration of at-risk minors. Thousands of pages of documentation, and one common symbol stamped into every folder, every journal, every wall, a triangle inside a circle. Rachel traced it with her finger one night and whispered, "This was never about healing." Tommy's recovery continued. He still struggled with language, with sleep, with daylight, but the memories, fragmented as they were, began connecting. One night he asked, "Do you remember the closet?" Rachel looked up from her tea. He was sitting across from her, blanket wrapped around his shoulders. "What closet?" "In the basement, before the promise room, the small one, with the gray door. You used to hide in it." Rachel froze. "I don't remember that." Tommy nodded slowly. "You used to hold my hand through the crack." Rachel's eyes filled with tears. It came back in a rush. A dark, cold space. A sliver of light beneath the door. A child's hand in hers. She'd forgotten. Or buried it. And now... It came back like a scream in a silent house. 6 weeks later, the house was scheduled for demolition. The state had declared it unfit, structurally compromised, and emotionally too toxic to preserve. Rachel stood in front of it one last time, boards across the windows, tape around the property line, and the old maple tree in the backyard still shedding leaves like it hadn't noticed anything had changed. She walked through the interior, dust thick in the air. Her footsteps soft on rotting boards. She found the basement door still slightly ajar. And then, just before leaving, she saw it. The closet. Not the promise room. Not the fake wall. Not the hidden space. The small gray door, tucked beneath the basement stairs. The one no one ever opened. She hadn't seen it in years. She stepped closer. Reached for the knob. It turned easily. Inside was nothing. No monsters, no ghosts, no secrets, just a hollow space. And on the inside of the door, drawn in faded red crayon, were 2 stick figures, holding hands. One had long hair, the other a small crown, and beneath them the word, "Safe." Rachel shut the door, and for the first time in 30 years, she let it stay closed. The trial began 8 months later. 23 people were indicted. 6 pled guilty. 5 fled. 2 were found dead. The rest faced charges in a federal courtroom where survivors sat in rows, clutching one another's hands like lifelines. Rachel testified for 2 hours. So did Tommy. The courtroom was silent when he finished. The press called it the Lost Promise case, but the survivors knew it by another name. They called it the mirror break. The moment someone refused to forget, refused to obey, and brought the house down from the inside. Rachel later started a foundation, the Never Again Fund, for trauma victims, for families searching for children long assumed lost. She wrote a book. She spoke at conferences. She even taught. But most of the time, she kept to herself. And every Sunday, she'd sit beside Tommy on a quiet church bench just outside Portland, where no one asked for interviews and no one mentioned the past. They'd sit in silence, until Tommy, one day, looked up and said, "The door stayed closed, right?" Rachel smiled. It did. He leaned his head on her shoulder. And for the first time since 1993, they were just brother and sister.